Good morning and welcome to this Euractiv virtual conference, Achieving a Digital and Sustainable Recovery. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Our event today is kindly supported by Zurich, and also we're welcoming an audience on YouTube as well this morning. So very pleased to have you online today. The whole debate has been live streamed. Before we start, just allow me to say a few words about Euractiv. We're a pan-European media. We specialize in EU policy, and we publish online in 13 languages from offices across 13 European capitals as well. In addition to our publishing business, we also host about 80 policy debates a year, including these virtual events, which are becoming much more prolific, as you will understand. And we will start with opening statements this morning by our speakers, which will be approximately 2 minutes with the key messages. Then we'll follow with an open discussion between the panelists, and this will be a conversational style. We won't have long policy statements this morning. And after that, we'll invite stakeholders and others to address our panelists with a Q&A session straight after that too. If you want to tweet today, then please use the hashtag EADebates, and we'll try and retweet some of that content for you as well. So let me introduce our panelists before they kick off with their short statements. We have today Thomas Gagek. He's the Director of Digital Business Solutions at DG Digit at the European Commission. Alison Martin, CEO of Europe, Middle East and Africa and Bank Distribution for Zurich. Veronica Hunt Safrankova, she's head of the Brussels office at UN Environment. And Stefan Sipka, he's a policy analyst with the European Policy Center. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for your time this morning. We really appreciate it. So Thomas, would you want to kick off this morning with your opening remarks?
It helps tremendously when you're muted, I think. Thank you very much, Brian.
It
Thanks
depends who's talking.
Me.
Thank you, Thomas. You can go ahead.
The coronavirus pandemic and the crisis that came with it, it brought a lot of tragedies and hardships to us. And it also, however, made us think and made us really take a hard look, forced us to take a hard look at ourselves and the way we live our lives, we do our businesses, and we go about our day-to-day errands. And I think there is quite a few things, quite a few lessons to be taken from it. There is one thing that we were forced to adapt with or to let go of. There are certain paradigms, like can we all work outside the office? Actually, yes, we can. And a personal takeaway, by the way, for me is it doesn't make sense to be with two people in a 7-story building while at the same time you're desperately trying not to bump into each other. So there are just some things where we thought which make a lot of sense, like to have a last two last men standing in the office to keep things running when everybody else is gone. The other thing is the behavior side of things. So we were forced and we were thrown off the beaten track in the way we did our business. We had no choice but to accept that virtual meetings have to be done as the only way of doing business. And hey, all of a sudden we found out that can actually work, even for meetings where we always thought these have to be face-to-face. The thing is though, we also noticed we needed some new rules about this. To be assumed to be always accessible can be a curse, of course. So we had to fight the always on mentalities right from the start. So we introduced things like no meeting zones during the day. Certain areas were just off limits for meeting scheduling. The other thing is there were always regulatory barriers, like the number of days you can work from home in the Commission, and we are a highly regulated organization. And that went out, of course, straight through the window at the very beginning of the crisis. So we have no upper limits, at least for this year. And I doubt that we will just reintroduce the old limits for next year. So it's an enormous opportunity that we have by using the recovery from the crisis as a moment of mindfulness, where we really take conscious decisions about what do we want to keep in order to upgrade our quality of life, our environmental footprint, and overall the way that we live our lives. So I think it's a moment where we really need to take a breath, reflect, and then make a choice. It's crossroads. And I'm sure we get to lots of these specific aspects during the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Excellent commencement to our discussion this morning. I really like the idea of no meeting zones during the day. As a journalist, that hasn't happened yet. Let's go to Alison Martin as well. Alison, you online there?
Thank you very much, Brian. So maybe to add, I can only echo what Thomas has said. So to add a slightly different perspective, I think what COVID-19 has reminded us in a terribly tragic way is about the importance of building resilience to risk. And we talk in the WEF Global Risk Report, I've been on this platform before talking about that, about the importance of actually building resilience to really complex interconnected risk. And I think the topic of today, digitization and sustainability, are equally complex connected risk as COVID-19 has proven to be as well, and requires the same kinds of solutions, public-private partnerships, and importantly, bringing society with you if you want to actually address fundamental change. So a few quick words on, so digitization, I mean, this has been our savior during the crisis for many. So it has not only helped many businesses to keep afloat and keep going, it's helped people stay in education. It's also helped people kind of keep their health. I mean, there's many aspects of life where it's only been enabled because of digitization. So I think we should take that as the huge positive it's been. But unfortunately, we can't forget the risks. So cyber attacks have increased fivefold. There's growing questions around data privacy, ethical use of data, what is acceptable for people or not. These are questions we're going to have to address. And of course, the increase of digitization often comes with the question mark around equality, or rather inequality of work opportunities. So to many people, there's a increasing automation has resulted in fantastic productivity improvements, but it has resulted in a very unequal landing of work. So I think we have to think about how we address that. And then a last quick word, obviously, on climate change as part of the broader sustainability initiatives. I think we have I'll go with the opportunity, as Thomas put it, that this terrible tragedy has given us to reset now. And it really, the unprecedented amount of stimulus that is being put has a great opportunity to be used for good and to build resilience to what is arguably a much greater threat, that of increasing temperature rise. If we reach 3-4 degrees, then unfortunately the economic consequence we see today will pale into insignificance to what we will see in that scenario. So we can use this stimulus. We have infrastructure gaps. Europe's infrastructure gap is about $2 trillion. We can use the stimulus money to build back better and to create a brighter future. Thank you.
Nice touch of optimism this morning. Thank you, Alison. Our next speaker this morning is Veronica Safrankova. Are you there, Veronica?
Yes, thank you, and good morning. And I do apologize that you cannot see me. I was a victim of a failure of technology, but thank you very much for connecting me. This is absolutely extremely timely debate, and I very appreciate to be part of this. To echo the others, the pandemic exposed many fragilities of our economies and inequalities. We definitely need to strengthen and invest in resilience and innovation and cooperation in our societies. Also, the COVID pandemic underscored our reliance on digital technology and reminded us that we do need to accelerate the use of digital technology to help both the people and the planet. I would like to echo and remind the UN Secretary General's roadmap for digital cooperation, which was launched this month, actually, which calls to connect all people by 2030, but at the same time, respecting human rights online and protect the most vulnerable from potential risks of digital advancement. We certainly need to mobilize the global cooperation, which is necessary to deploy digital resources to support well-being of people and the sustainable transition. We also need the technological leaps aligned with sustainability goals to recover in terms of time and costs, both or three, socio, ecological, and economic, not only in Europe, but worldwide. And the role of the digital technology in aligning the short-term economic stimulus and long-term climate objectives is absolutely crucial in the recovery phase and being prepared for the future. As Thomas was saying, the e-meetings or the reduction of the meetings, that's also we are looking at in the multilateral environmental governance space to modernize, to reduce the environmental footprint of meeting platforms and sectors, but also human activities. I will cut short now, but what is absolutely essential is for our work in the environmental field and also in the fight of for the future are credible multidisciplinary environmental data to foster equitable and sustainable and resilient society. We should deploy the digital technologies to benefit of nature and people through, for example, aligning human consumption patterns and behaviors with sustainability goals, also transforming markets with digital insights on environmental risks, and using smart infrastructure in cities, energy systems, in agriculture, and to increase resource efficiency. So my last sentence, digital technology and data, absolutely crucial to recover smartly and healthy. And as Alison was saying, to build, it's our chance to build back better. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica. Excellent. Stefan, 2 minutes, off you go.
Morning, Brian. Thank you. Yes, so I can only agree with basically what previous speakers said. So indeed, this Corona crisis is first and foremost a crisis and a terrible tragedy, many lives lost, and also a hardship, also including hardships for our economy and yet to come. But that being said, it is true that it is also, once it's here already, it's a chance, it's an opportunity to actually make some structural changes, to create a more resilient economy, but also a more sustainable economy. And these two are closely intertwined. So sustainability is important to actually, first of all, it can support the recovery process. It can create new and added value for our economy. It can actually lead to create new jobs or result in creation of new jobs. But it can also serve to as a tool to avoid future crises that may occur. Be it they can be linked to diseases or something else, but more or less they're linked to, they could result from global warming, biodiversity loss, and other environmental challenges that we are facing, will be facing. So sustainability is a way, a mechanism. If we go to, if we increase, double our efforts toward increase resource efficiency to achieve climate neutral Europe, we actually also could prevent future crises from occurring. We also see how actually this crisis, in a way, sustainability improved to some extent. We saw how air quality improved in cities because of the reduced congestion and transportation. And why don't we just use this as an opportunity to try to also retain some of these good things that actually we experienced during this crisis, despite the tragedy. So what we should use now the investments and other different policy instruments to actually try to make our economy more sustainable now in the but since we're already facing this crisis. And digitalization, we witnessed how the importance of digital tools of ICT now during the crisis, and arguably we should continue improving our capacities when it comes to digital infrastructure, and also to make Europe more competitive. And our economy more competitive globally. But then it is important to look at these two agendas, again, as very closely intertwined. So digitalization can support sustainability, as already mentioned. It can improve sharing of data, exchange of information. It can improve our industrial processes, waste management processes. It can connect, digital tools can connect people, organizations, their things. So it can serve as an enabler. But that being said, digital transformation itself needs to be steered to be made to become more greener. So whether we talk about energy efficient electronics, or we talk about more energy efficient data centers, we need to think about software, different apps, blockchain, AI. We need to think about how to actually make them more energy and material efficient, because arguably we will be using them more and more. So these are the challenges. But also, if we do this right, and European Green Deal already highlighted some of these opportunities, can really set at least Europe on the right track.
Thank you, Stefan. Thanks to all our panelists for really excellent scoping exercise and what we want to talk about this morning. Let's start talking about in terms of resilience and the need to upgrade our digital infrastructure. Even just last week, I was doing an interview with a senior MEP. They were in their home capital, I'll not tell you which one, and they could not get a good internet connection to do the interview via Zoom. It was only the third time on the second day that they were able to get to a location where that was possible as well. In 21st century in Europe, this shouldn't be happening. Thomas, what do you think? What has this crisis taught us about where the gaps are in our digital infrastructure and what needs to be addressed first?
Yeah, I agree with your observation. We had some really funny things here, particularly in Belgium or around Brussels, where we would expect the infrastructure to be kind of like flawless, the capital of Europe, but it actually isn't. So we bump into these type of issues a lot, and it clearly demonstrates that the availability of broadband, of reliable and quality broadband, is a key element of it. But it's only one part of it. I think the other part is we all see and love those messages from our computer. There is a new version of whatever software you're running available. We recommend that you update as soon as possible. When you talk in a managed infrastructure, you always also have to think about ways that you manage it in a decentralized way, that people don't come to the office, where you have a different level of control over what's happening on the endpoints. So I think that there is a very basic thing where access to broadband actually has to be commonly available. And there is also a thing about how we manage the individual devices and the individual elements of the infrastructure end to end.
Alison, from your perspective, resilience is core to this, and we're now looking at an open book on what risks we weren't prepared for, and perhaps we have a better view to what risks we face in the future. What should we do next? What are our next steps for digital infrastructure?
So I would agree with the prioritization that Thomas said. I think it's about deciding where do we want to do something collectively. So where is Europe going to be strongest by being together? And I say that obviously people can hear the British accent, and it's unfortunate that Europe will look a little different in the future than it does today. But anyway, notwithstanding Brexit, I think we have to recognise that our power is in being together, and it's not only the European institutions being together, but it's also working with business, because we need to accelerate and fuel innovation, and that's only going to happen if it's a joint initiative between the institutions and also then with companies who are very keen to be part of it. So for me, the resilience agenda, it's been very clear on what the critical success factors are, and then working together to achieve.
Speed of change has got to be a key element now, as well as that we realize the vaccine is a great example of how long it takes to find a solution to an urgent problem as well. Are we going to deal differently with data over the next few years? Are we going to really analyze that in terms of data sharing so that we can solve solutions, find solutions more quickly? Sorry,
Brian, was that addressed to me?
Yes, it was.
Yeah. So are we going to? I would love us to, yes. I think the question in itself, though, is a bit rhetorical. Will we? And we do need to agree common standards. Now, arguably, Europe does have, through GDPR, we have already set the benchmark for what is an appropriate standard as it relates to privacy of data. I think there are, unfortunately, a huge swathe of questions on data, whether it's information governance, that still have yet to be addressed. I said in my remarks a little bit about ethics, and I think that ethical use of data is so important, and who is going to set that standard for what is an ethical use of data? Are we happy to leave it to organizations and to different industry sectors to determine? And obviously different industry sectors are regulated in very different ways. So what one industry may be required to do could be quite different to another. I personally think we could do with a very swift discussion around what ethical use of data is. I think there are some jurisdictions in the world who have done an awful lot in putting together a framework to say what is right, what is reasonable for countries, for companies to do with people's data, and have that transparent discussion.
Thank you. Veronica, digital infrastructure resilience, from your perspective on the environmental side, where are we going now?
Thank you. Well, I mentioned the data also in the opening 2 minutes. That is really important. And I agree with Alison that we need a governance framework guided by common standards. And the standards, they need to support the access, exchange, integration, and also cooperation of the use of the data in a coordinated and collaborative manner. There are lots of agencies, organizations collecting data, but we really need to pull them together, and also the cross-sectoral cooperation. The openness of data, we are all working towards that, but there also needs to be quality control, ensure that the provided data have the adequate quality, and cross-check with other sources. It is important to ensure that the digital infrastructure enhances multidisciplinary approach, tackling both the emerging crises and also addressing diversity and equity. I mentioned maybe at the beginning that we are working on the World Environment Situation Room, which is designed to monitor global environmental issues and risks, as well as try to identify gaps in technology, solutions, and data by aggregating and visualizing the best available public environmental data. Of course, it's a wide partnership with all different stakeholders from different sectors, public, private companies. But this is I would say the flagship that is very much needed. Also a global platform on geospatial data, and it was mentioned on the European level. There is a lot already done. Also the Inspire directive on geospatial data, Copernicus, fantastic source of information. So we just need to make sure that we collaborate on all these different levels.
We're missing the trust element now as well, aren't we? I think Tony Blair emerged yesterday from sort of semi-retirement to advocate the need for something like a situation room where there is an alert system which is trusted, because WHO is damaged goods in some regards at the moment. You know, can we get this trust element back into the political structure to ensure that there is an early warning system, that there is a situation room facility to draw these strands together?
I believe so. I really hope so, because we desperately need this. We need the trust, and without ensuring the early warning systems and this joint approach, without that we will fail. I mean, that's very clear. We need to pull together, and there's no need to undermine the trust. Science is science, data is data. So we need to work towards rebuilding this trust, and policymakers, decision makers, they should work with the data, and the science should not be disputable. It's here, and
I think this is broadcasting to America as well. Maybe that message will cut across a little bit. Stefan, when you look at the lessons to be learned from this, and we've spoken about infrastructure now, but in terms of sustainability, where do we go to? What are the elements? And you touched on we have seen the carbon reduction, particularly in cities as well. We've seen our lifestyles change. Certainly, I don't miss the morning commute. These kind of things, are they really going to stay, or are we going to get caught back into the everyday loop and things will go back to normal, and the capacity for change, the capacity to learn from this moment will be lost again?
That is indeed a challenge, and it's really not a straightforward solution. There may be trade-offs. For example, we now see that different companies and economy, they are just asking for support, and they need the support now, and that is a short-term challenge. But then we have a long-term challenge, and if we don't reconcile these two requests accordingly, we can end up in a lock-in effect where we support certain economic activities that in the long run can actually maybe result in a new crisis, and then it's a vicious circle. So it's a difficult question for sure, and ideally support to our financial support investments should be linked to some kind of a conditionality or incentivizing green more like.
What will give you confidence that that conditionality would actually deliver results? Because these are large-scale, long-term projects by and large. The vast amount of money that has been put on the table for the recovery package could easily be spent in the wrong way in terms of the environment. How would you control that delivery of cash and the progression of these projects?
It can easily go the wrong way, for sure, but that's where we need to think how to invest it in a smart way. For example, one way is renovation wave, investing in buildings that are green but as well as smart. That's when we come back to this link between digital and green. So investing in certain sectors where actually we can reap the long-term benefits economically, but also in terms of environmental benefits. Of course, if there are short-term urgency measures that we need to support an industry where that otherwise people will lose jobs and they can't find new ones, I mean, it's definitely, there is no perfect solution in this situation, but we need to bear in mind, even in this short-term period when our industry needs support, we need to bear in mind also public interests such as environment, sustainability, public health, and so forth. And then slowly, especially on the mid and long term, we fully focus again on investments that are compatible fully with the sustainability goals, and hopefully even now. But just to say on the digital infrastructure, this is also key to sustainability. I mean, starting first of all with the internet coverage, which can be definitely improved as a first and foremost. We could look into the possibilities to then improve other, like to switch to fiber instead of copper-based connectivity. Then there is a sensitive issue of 5G, which again, Europe hardly accomplished the transition towards 4G, and there is 6G on horizon, and 5G is an issue. And I mean, despite different kinds of things people can read about this, it's important to also understand that there are that this technology can improve, make our processes more efficient. For example, it can support the automatization of our vehicles. This is linked to electromobility. All of this, these changes can actually result in greater sustainability, notwithstanding rebound effects. But that being said, automated vehicles, connected vehicles, electrical vehicles can actually be good, beneficial for our economy and environment. Also, automatization of our industrial processes can reduce material consumption and so forth. It can improve our waste management processes. So these are very much intertwined. I will also mention 3D printing, for example, and additive manufacturing, which can help relocalize our economy to some extent and maybe make direct certain supplies directly available, which otherwise we need to wait to be imported from somewhere else.
Let me just ask Alison. Alison, we have this capacity to rebuild in a more positive, more green way right now. But France, for example, is looking at 12% drop in GDP. And there are other countries which are going to face even tougher declines than that across Europe too. How do you convince national governments to spend on the long-term viability of sustainable projects and to support green finance when basically they've got elections coming up and they need to keep people in jobs?
I wish I had the silver bullet for that question. But here's a few two-penneths on it. I think Veronica made a really important point earlier around the importance of listening to science, to quote, I guess, Greta Thunberg, that we, I guess, unfortunately, the COVID-19 crisis has again shown that in some places there's not a huge appetite to listen to science. And somehow we have to bridge that gap very rapidly. Because if we look at the debate around climate change, you have to question, why is this a debate? The science is clear. So I'll put aside the existential question as to why people don't believe in science, because unfortunately we're seeing it happen again and again. Where would I have some optimism would be in the fact that the capital markets, institutional money has woken up to the fact that you need to have a long-term payback return for investing your capital into companies or into bonds, etc. And therefore, organizations like the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance are calling for actually companies to be putting out science-based targets, to be committing to a net zero by 2050, if they want to continue to have people investing in their stock and in their credit. So I think to me, that is the positive opportunity that clearly companies cannot do this. It cannot be the institutional investors who solve this crisis without government. That would make no sense. We need to have the right projects to invest in. However, the fact that there's so much industry momentum that is calling for opportunities to invest in a net zero future, then that gives me the small amount of optimism. If we can bridge this, if we can stop there being a debate about climate change and an acceptance of the reality of the science, and the fact that then it's about industry transformation in order to deliver to a 1.5 degree world, what investment does that require?
Do you see the leadership coming? I know you won't exclude government from this, but do you see the real leadership coming from the private sector on this issue, and that government is there to assist rather than the leadership in this issue really being driven from capitals?
I think it has to be both. It can't be, it shouldn't be that it's companies' leadership. And I think we see some great, obviously with the EU's recent Green Deal with the 750 billion euros. I think there are great examples now from the European Commission of its drive for ensuring this sustainable recovery. So I actually think that gives exactly what you need. You have a very motivated set of institutional investors, and you have a very motivated government, because you have to have both. It wouldn't work with only one.
Thomas, has the Commission's narrative changed because of this crisis? Ursula von der Leyen speaking much more about policies which are human-centric, whereas last crisis round, everything was about fixing the economy, and it was a spreadsheet exercise with the human costs calculated sometime later. Is this a new narrative for the Commission, Thomas?
No, I don't think at all it's a new narrative. Maybe the focus has, or the weighting has a little bit changed. I mean, it's now very clear, as we discussed already before, that digitalization has to go much higher on the agenda. But it's not, is it green or is it digital? It's now both. And this is what the Commission is trying to do here, and working very hard as we speak, to make sure that the fund that is the recovery fund that is going to be spent in the near future is spent in a holistic manner and addressing all the different aspects of it, from skills to infrastructure to the different parts of the development of the job market and the labor market. So I think the narrative hasn't changed, which is quite surprising actually. So it means we were kind of like we had the right ideas before, well, not me, but our political level here, of course. And I'm really glad right now I'm not a politician. So it's, as Alison said, it's whoever has the silver bullet, now it's the time to come out and show it. And let me just come back on one aspect very briefly. I think when we're talking security, when we're talking resilience, when we're talking digitalization, in IT, in the practical IT world, we have something called a picnic, which means problem in chair, not in computer. So I think when we talk digitalization, the aspect that is to my personal opinion, quite underrepresented is the skills side of things. When we have calls to the help desk where people ask us for what is my Wi-Fi password at my home. I mean, of course, it's a good laugh, but what it really shows is there is something that we need to address. We cannot expect everybody to have a vital and intense interest in their computer in front of them into the Wi-Fi at their home. We need to educate people. We need to make people aware. And I think that is a strong call for action for us as organization on all different levels, public sector, private sector. What do we do in the schools? What do we do in our companies? And as we all know, what we know today is totally out of fashion in 2 years and totally irrelevant in 5. So it's a constant lifelong learning thing around digitalization. It has to come with it.
Thank you. We have a question from Juliet Engel. Juliet, it's a long question. Thank you for all that. I'm going to take one part of it, which is to do with digital servers. And Juliet, thanks to the panelists for cybersecurity, data privacy, and the subjects which she says are very exciting indeed. However, there are two subjects which are never discussed. I'm going to take one of them: the huge energy consumption of servers required to make a digital world, and the energy needed to launch satellites and so on. So let's look at the digital world and the consumption of energy needed to power smart cities, our AI, and our industries of the future. Veronica, are we investing cash in one direction and blowing up the planet on the other?
I'm here, sorry. Sorry for the pause. Well, actually, the question that was put forward, I had in my when I was preparing for this, it was one of the things in my notes that we also need to focus on the footprint of the digital infrastructure, and it was very rightly pointed out that there is the energy efficiency issue, and the data centers, telecommunications, servers, they should become more energy efficient, reuse waste energy, and also use more renewable energy resources to become climate neutral by 2030, but certainly strive for that. But also re-skilling people not to only benefit from the digital infrastructure, but also to contribute to practices that give more back to the planet. And that sense, that was, Brian, exactly your point, that we need to also start being a little bit less selfish and invest more in I would actually say one number, which is quite striking, that ecosystems and ecosystem services make up to 80% of the GDP of the poor. They are dependent on the ecosystem services, but degradation of soil, shortage and pollution of water, deforestation, overfishing, and so on, that really impacts the jobs and livelihoods. So that's very much to consider this.
Thank you, Veronica. We have another question here from Sebastian Dan Naste. How can the software automation or robotic processes automation help for a post-COVID-19 EU recovery? It's quite specific. Stefan, how can the software automation or robotic process automation help in a post-COVID-19 EU recovery?
Well, for example, if we look at, let's look at the waste management sector. Robots can actually be used to sort end-of-life products, basically use products more efficiently. If you can do that, costs are going down, and then you can increase the amount of material that can actually be either reused or recycled. And these are local materials that Europe has already in the urban mine that can then be reused. Therefore, it creates an added value, and also it can lead to a more resilient European economy. Then again, if we look at just typical industrial processes, simply the processes are more efficient if you have AI or a robot or that has or the digital twin technology that the machine can learn how to improve certain practices. Again, it's different kinds of industrial processes. I would consider modern recycling processes part of this, but this is just an example. Then mobility is another case. If we move on to more automatized and maybe fully automatized cars, they would be able maybe to find a certain route more efficiently than humans would do, which would then increase congestion, CO2 emissions, so it can also be beneficial for our economy. In a nutshell.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to comment on this particular question? You think about that for a second. Let's take another question from Gabino Guterres. Which will be, in your opinion, the role of local governments in the recovery? Thomas, you can take this. Which will be the role of local governments in the recovery? How could the first line of elected public institutions contribute to the recovery? Thank you very much. Thomas.
Good one, difficult one. I think the way that we look at it from a European perspective is about, well, as little centralization as possible, and particularly on these things where agility is important. So one aspect I briefly wanted to touch upon before is spending our recovery fund. I mean, it doesn't help us if you spend it in a perfect way and start giving out the money in 5 years. So we have to be really fast now, and we have to accept that we may only be able to do it pretty good, but not perfect, to meet the timelines that are expected. And therefore, the local government effectively has to make sure that the money is directed in the best possible way, as much as whatever the local legal framework permits. And that is very much a question of the member states. But of course, now what will happen exactly, what school will, coming back to skills, how to do things at the school, what schools, what education centers, etc. That is something where local government, the first line of public defense, so to speak, will have to play a crucial role.
Thomas, just to stay on that for a second, one of the lessons from COVID-19 has been that agility didn't really happen, that you needed national coordination, you needed international coordination, and the countries that fared best at this had centralized control in Europe, Estonia, for example, Latvia, and internationally, Singapore, Taiwan, Israel, for example, had clear centralized command and control structures, and deployment of resources happened quickly, purchasing happened quickly. Is that something that's really going to be reassessed now? Do local authorities have the capacity to deal with such large-scale problems?
I think we need to separate two things. There is this imminent moment when the crisis occurs, and there is no time for debate. And crisis management is very much about making sure things happen, and somebody has to take charge. And I think this is what we've seen. And this is what helped us in many ways. Well, many ways also not, but it depends on who takes charge and what is, how much data science and how data driven is the person who takes charge. But let's not go there right now. What we will see when we come out to something like a recovery fund, it's very difficult to say out of Brussels, is it best spent in that on that institution in the south of whatever, Poland, or on the coast of Estonia, or in that other part of that institution. So in order to really meet the requirements of the edge, and where to really find the maximum impact for the recovery funds, we have to trust who is really close to the problem. Of course, we will assist and we help as a European Commission, and when we distribute the money, and we will make sure that it lands in a place where it's effective. But effectively, a lot of these things need to be, at the end of the day, decided by the local authorities.
But isn't the problem for the rapid distribution of cash, the audit process as well, and the Commission being innately risk averse by its nature? It has to be accountable for taxpayers' money. And so this noble aspiration to do things faster, not perfectly, runs into the accounting office, and that may slow things down. Do you see a change in attitude to this, or is Europe going to become less risk adverse, more adventurous, more self-confident in trying to find new solutions faster?
Not that I'm aware of specific directives in that front. If I may bring in my personal observations, how I see my colleagues in charge of the structural funds, how are behaving is they're taking a quite proactive stance, avoiding the word aggressive because that doesn't describe it, but being very proactive in helping the member states in order to find places where the money, find the places where the money is best spent. I think right now we all understand there is a lot of speed required. You may know, and let's not go there too much into the internal cuisine of the Commission, but we are putting out a new general directorate right now, which is in charge of a significant amount of the recovery fund. So we building a structure that allows us to be, of course, responsible and mindful of handling taxpayers' money, but on the other hand, making sure that the money is where it can actually do good as we speak.
Okay, thank you. A question from Fred. In which manner could the GAIAX initiative also play a role in sustainability efforts EU-wide? Veronica, can you take that?
Could you please repeat it?
Yes, in which manner could the GAIAX initiative also play a role in sustainability efforts EU-wide? Oh, Stefan. I'll leave that with you for a moment. Fred, can you add another bit to that, please? Can you just explain how you think the GAIAX initiative could be used? And I'll put that back to the panel in a second. Let's go to Alfredo Corbalan. How do we reconcile the digital agenda with the green one? Studies are showing that the digital shift will also have a very important impact on environmental, especially on increasing the energy, but also on CO2 with increase of e-commerce and deliveries and other side effects. Stefan, can I bring that back to you? And then maybe Alison want to comment on that as well.
Sure.
So how to reconcile the digital agenda with the green one, and especially the increase, we've touched on this a little bit, but if we expect increase in e-commerce and deliveries and other side effects, how do we balance this out? Is this corporate sustainability? Or we build this into governance structures or finance structures? What's the best way forward?
Both, indeed. Digital transformation will definitely have rebound effects, especially if it's not steered properly. So there are definitely these kind of challenges, such as energy consumption of electronic products, infrastructure, use of critical materials in our smartphones, for example, and we know that these materials are rare and also usually imported from somewhere else. So these are definitely the challenges of our time. E-commerce is specific, is especially important to highlight, because we know how many products are being bought now online, especially during the crisis. We have the packaging waste, we have energy consumption. Then what to do with the products that are not sold? The e-retailers might be incentivized to destroy unsold products rather than to give them away because, for example, the VAT for charity. So there are these kind of institutional issues. Also, what to do with the waste product if it's bought online. So this requires, that's why we need policy intervention. We can't just leave digital transformation unfold on its own. We need to have this public interest being protected also at the EU level, but by member states as well. But that being said, digital transformation also provides an enormous opportunity to improve sustainability. And then if we talk about Gaia X, for example, and I would link this also to the common European data space, which is now being envisaged under the data strategy. These are enormous opportunities to actually improve data sharing, data processing, which is crucial for public health, but it is also important for wider sustainability efforts, because we need to connect different parts of the value chains, which are globalized, by the way, so it's also a global effort, if we really want to ensure that different, let's say, externalities in different stages of the life cycle are taken into account. Everybody needs to be part of the game. They can't only look into their own silos, also including supply chains, different, they need to be all connected, and we need to share information. And of course, this is also an important challenge linked to trust, personal data, security issues, business sensitive data. This is a process that involves voluntary business involvement, but also to some extent mandatory overriding public interest and standards to actually ensure the data.
Okay. Let's bring Alison in this through. Alison, any quick comments on this before we move on to another question?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we should have some faith that as organizations set science-based targets, including on their own operations, then their utilization of their consumption of energy, whether it be through data centers, etc., as we were just talking about, then that's going to have to be transparently disclosed what's happening, and there needs to be targets set to show how it's going to be reduced, whether that's through the power source that they're using, or just better still by alternatives and actually reducing the usage full stop, let alone the power source. So I think we should continue to support the drive and the acceleration of the requirements for transparency around those areas, so that there is one consistent level playing field, ideally globally, but at least within Europe, so that people understand that they can set targets. That does not mean they're going to be not competitive in the global world.
Okay, just you work in the insurance industry. I was at a healthcare conference in Romania last summer, and one of your competitors was presenting there on the risk elements and how they were changing to do with antimicrobial resistance. And basically the narrative was they were only prepared to underwrite hospital organizations or healthcare practices that adopted a particular kind of strategy, which was low risk and for the long term as well. From your side of the business, do you have this kind of influence when it comes to the green agenda, digital agenda as well, that the insurance world, I'm not asking you to speak specifically about Zurich, but do you see in the insurance world a pattern of behavior which, if you're not investing in sustainability, if you're not upgrading your digital infrastructure, your risk element increases and you're not good business. Does that make sense?
It does. I guess there's two different things though. One is whether a risk is a good risk or not, and whether you can price it effectively. And one is whether it's going to be beneficial for society to have that company, that industry transform. And there are certain sectors where we have been very clear, particularly those which are heavy CO2 emitters, where we have said that unless those industries set science-based targets, then we would no longer be able to provide underwriting capacity or to provide any investment dollars. Because we believe, now ideally, clearly, that the reason why we're saying set science-based targets to achieve a net zero is to support a fair and positive transition. What we don't want is cliffs where suddenly capital gets taken out of industries rapidly without consideration of the knock-on effects that would have to workers, to communities, etc. So ideally, we try and support a transition. But yeah, I would bifurcate the two. One is about whether something could be a good underwriting risk. Now, often things which are bad underwriting risks tend to also be bad for society, but it's not universally true. Unfortunately, things like offshore wind can be very difficult on an underwriting basis because of the risk. So ideally, what we do is work with those companies to improve the risk profile so that you can get insurance.
Okay, thank you. That's interesting. And we have another question here for Thomas. Thomas, this is from Guillaume Dervaux from the Political Intelligence. How can the European Union ensure that citizens are fully empowered and truly engaged in development of digital health and well-being, with a view to guaranteeing both optimal use of technologies and social acceptance for the digital transformation of healthcare?
Yeah, I think there are two parts to it. The one thing is there is a big thing about education and awareness, as we had before. So it's, I think, one of the many roles of the European institutions and Commission to support the member states in their efforts to educate and to develop the skills and understanding within their own constituencies. The other thing that is, I think, from an acceptance perspective, a key element that is, we touched on it before, that is trust. So if I give my health data to a device, to a software, to whatever, I need to trust it in order to actually use it, unless I'm forced to use it. But this is definitely not the role of the European Commission. I think that with GDPR, we are setting the global standard here on what that trust actually could, how that trust could be built and could be enforced. And if I may, just very briefly on an anecdote, I'm sure you're all aware of the discussions of these corona tracing apps, where you afterwards are informed, hey, you've been in touch with somebody who had who was tested positive. There is an element here of this which is multinational, and the gateway which exchanges these data had been decided by the member states to be hosted by the Commission, which I think is a great sign of the trust that the European Commission has from a membership perspective, that they want us to host such a sensitive system. So I think from a trust perspective, there are some things where we as another element where we as European Union, European institutions are seen as a neutral element, particularly in countries where the trust to the government is not as high as in others.
Thank you, Thomas, for that. Stefan, there's a question there from Fred. Come back with a bit more info on Gaia X. Can you take a look at that for a second? And I'll come back to you in just a moment. Pedro Ortun. Pedro has a question for the panelists and asking about maybe Veronica, you want to take this? Opinions on the possibility to link the national and European financial support to EU companies impacted by the COVID crisis to their firm and transparent commitment to integrate responsible, sustainable values and criteria in the recovery strategies and investments internally, long question, and within their supply chains. This could be, he says, a strong incentive to promote CSR, SDG, and respect to human rights by a much larger number of EU companies, improving their contribution to the SDGs 2030. Veronica.
Yes, thank you for this question, and I agree with Pedro. This would be very good indeed. We are trying to work UN with different stakeholders, with governments, but also with local authorities and with companies to explain these principles. And certainly the greening of the hardest hit sectors by COVID, tourism, for example, manufacturing, agriculture, and transport, that certainly is opportunity to increase their competitiveness by reducing the energy and material footprint, but also create increase jobs. And I certainly think that would be very good motivation to include these principles in the financial support there. And we can see in many national plans that it is gradually happening. And as previously discussed, the green finance and sustainable financing is a very important role. And we are also working with financial sector and with investors to incorporate the principles in investing and also insurance. So yeah, certainly we are trying to help the different stakeholders, and very good point, Pedro.
Thank you. Another question from M. Vincent. Digitalization not only provides promising new technologies, but also changes our economy and society. Maybe Alison, you want to comment on this? The playing field will change, for example, in the balance of capacities and power between tech companies and governments. How will the changing playing field affect our chances of transforming to a more sustainable economy? It's Matthias from Dutch Council for the Environment and Infrastructure. Thank you. Alison.
I guess that how the playing field changes depends probably on the R word of regulation, as opposed to the transmission factor. I think there needs to be a very grown-up conversation around the importance of fair, level playing fields through regulation of different industries, given that data is the new gold. And data is the bedrock and the foundation now for all kinds of business models, not limited to those which class themselves as technology companies. I mean, we're an insurance company, but data has been forever. For the 150 years of our existence, data is the bedrock of insurance. It is for most financial services. It is for consumer goods. As you look at kind of the way the Internet of Things and the sense of technology in engineering, in manufacturing, data is everywhere. So I think, but for me, that depends on what Europe wants to do in terms of having a level playing field and regulation.
Okay, thank you. Stefan, quick answer to Fred, then we're going to go on to a bit more detail on cybersecurity. Fred says, yes, GAIAX is about edge computing and bringing data and computer power and hyperscale data centers into a more distributed and federated architecture. Nice to summarize. Until now, energy consumption was not a topic in the GAIAX discussion idea, but maybe it should be setting up this new cloud. Stefan.
Sure. Yes, I would say yes. It definitely should. We need to look at different angles, including environmental ones and including cloud computing, and also the initiative under GAIAX should definitely be part of that. And we need to look at also what are the benefits of it. It's a more complicated assessment. Does it actually lead to CO2 reductions, more energy resource efficiency as a result of what this solution will do? But that being said, definitely we need to make all cloud-based technologies more energy efficient, including the upcoming GAIAX initiative.
Okay, thank you. And so the questions, two questions on regulation. From Matthias, we've already had, but I'll summarize this in a second. And Mike Tremblay. Mike says, Dr. Michael Tremblay is a health policy specialist in France. And he asks, do we want governments to vacate much regulation, rules and laws, as the pandemic has shown that many regulations in place have proved dysfunctional? Novel concept there. And for instance, healthcare data protections can hamper data modeling for building an anticipatory capacity and improve at-risk patient identification. Indeed, recovery funding may actually be protecting the status quo and not enabling new business and institutional models to emerge. I could give you some clear examples on that if we have more time. So let's, Alison, quick comment on that first, and then perhaps Veronica.
So in short, as an industry which is heavily regulated, then actually it may surprise you to say, no, I don't think government should vacate regulation. I think, however, we should look to whether regulation should be more principles-based rather than very specific rules-based. I think having a set of commonly agreed principles, whether that's on ethical use of data, for instance, or whether it's on artificial intelligence, etc., then I think that means we're all on the level playing.
The healthcare, I hear from doctor friends frequently that they would like to do more, but their insurance prohibits them from doing so. Does government need to step in here and be able to bridge that gap so that we have, like Michael says, that we have the capacity to move faster with data to find the solutions and not be overly concerned about the sort of regulation which is designed to protect but also hinders in the moment of urgency? Alison.
So I think, does regulation enable you to move fast or slow? I think as a basic principle, if it is a principles-based regulation and it is more around how we would like people to be conducting business, then in of itself it shouldn't stop anyone from moving quickly. I think having a very complex interconnected web of different laws and regulation that is very proscriptive, of course, yes, navigating a way through that is always going to mean that you're slower. It's one of the reasons why, I guess, particularly in financial services, there have been the sandboxes created to try and enable innovation to happen in a much faster pace, to avoid some of that very, very complex rule environment. I do agree with what the question's saying around the fact that does, in some cases, protect the status quo, having that very complex set of webs, which is not helpful for society.
Thank you. Veronica, quick comment on that?
Well, I have not much to add, but I agree with Alison that I would be careful with the vacating of the regulations. They are there for good reason, but there should be self-reflection on the national level on the efficiency and how it is conducted, and of course the implementation. But basically, I would echo what Alison just said.
Okay, Thomas, on this also, do you see this as an opportunity to create a new toolbox for resilience planning, that we should anticipate these crises and that we should perhaps adapt our rules at moments of urgency?
I think from our perspective, the question is, again, what are the principles that we want to sustain? And what principles, the principles should stand the test of time and should stand the test of crisis, I think. If they don't, we should think about our principles. So vacate regulation, I think definitely no, but really make sure, to Alison's point, that they are firmly rooted in our principles of freedom and individual rights.
Excellent answer. Thank you for that. We're coming close to our wrap-up time, but I want to touch a bit more on cybersecurity. Let me just ask each of our panelists a short answer on cybersecurity. What keeps you up at night when we talk about cybersecurity? What have you learned from this pandemic that we've been particularly bad at and we got to fix quickly? Stefan, what keeps you up at night in cybersecurity?
Yes, well, actually, I mean, I'm looking at it from a more a sustainability perspective, and then I mean, cybersecurity is definitely something that needs to be a prerequisite to actually when we talk about further sharing of information, making our data more accessible, and then protecting our data in a more digitalized world. This is something that in a way is an infrastructure of its own. And it's just something that we need to make our systems more.
Do you think that we understand the problem well enough at the moment? Have you learned anything in terms of where the risk element is from cybersecurity during this crisis? Not just in terms of data privacy, but also the corruption of the data, the pivoting from destroying data systems and the need to make these systems more robust.
Well, indeed, I think there is this need to move towards a more robust system and simply to learning by doing and trial and error, and simply the crisis has shown that we are more and more dependent on digital solutions, and that these digital solutions need to be safe and robust to use, because it simply became a necessity. Before it was something that was maybe an added value, or but now it's a necessity. And all in all, we just need to learn from the crisis in order to be able to cope with any potential future crisis that may occur as well.
Okay. Alison, when we're looking at cybersecurity, and people are primarily concerned about data privacy in their own everyday lives, but the bigger societal impact is when you move to a much more digital society, more AI involved, more robotics in terms of overall manufacturing and economic output. And then we have a cyber attack which brings that crashing down in a hurry. Are we moving fast enough to build the walls to protect Europe when it comes to cybersecurity? And in terms of sustainability as well, clearly that has an impact.
I'm not sure a wall is necessarily the right answer when it's human beings like us who have the keys to the door and we keep opening it. So I think you could build a wall as high as you like, but it wouldn't make any difference because we keep unlocking it when we click on.
How do we protect Europe's infrastructure? How do we make ourselves more resilient when it comes to cybersecurity?
So I would start back with a very basic awareness, and unfortunately, in the same way as we. I guess for, I don't know how many years, 40 years in schools, we taught children about the risks of crossing the road, and we taught them about don't talk to strangers. Are we doing the same basic digital hygiene for people that if they're using their smartphones, if they're using their connected devices, as they transition into the workplace, are we teaching them about the criticality of basic hygiene? Because you can have the best systems, the best firewalls in the world, but all it takes is a person to click the wrong thing. And typically that's not the most junior person in an organization who may do that. So I think to me, there's a huge amount of basic awareness level. Clearly we need to get the existing workforce, but we also have to change through the education system, actually the awareness as people are coming into that work.
Thank you, which applies entirely to our healthcare system and hygiene as well. And so Thomas, on cybersecurity, where are we going with this? What really keeps you up at night and you're not feeling it's being addressed quickly enough or firmly enough?
Cybersecurity has for me two elements. The one that Alison just alluded to, which is us, and it's our behavior and it's our ability to behave in a sophisticated manner, particularly as the other side becomes more sophisticated as well. And there is let's say the war aspect to it. You know, we have lots of more and more sophisticated threat actors from countries which do not necessarily share our principles and values, who spend an incredible amount of effort and resources in checking our vulnerabilities. So all our resilience, that as long as it's digitally based, will go straight out of the window. Somebody can bring our digital infrastructure down without even sending a cruise missile. So that is something where we in the free world, and especially in the European Union, need to up our efforts. And we're doing things like a common response team on a European level, these kind of things. But there is a huge gap and a big work to do to really up our game that we can face the enemy.
Thank you. On that cheerful note, let's go to our concluding remarks. 30 seconds each to our panelists. My takeaway from this has been largely based around resilience, regulation, and the need for agility. Start with Stefan. Stefan, key takeaways.
We need to use this crisis as an opportunity to support the green transition, to achieve climate neutral Europe, and more resource efficient Europe. This is important for the recovery itself and for the long-term resilience of our economy. We need digital transformation. We need to invest in digital solutions, and we need to ensure that these two agendas are interlinked to achieve the synergetic effect and avoid rebound effects that also can help recovery and actually help create more resilient and competitive European economy.
Excellent. Thank you for the summary. Veronica, 30 seconds.
Yes, well, we need this is our opportunity to, as we said, build back better, greener, and investment in green economy, shift towards green economy, creating new jobs, green jobs, and actually look after the people first and the planet, which will help to recover from the COVID crisis, but will also prevent from the potential forthcoming crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison.
So I think this sad tragedy gives us the opportunity to reset, brighter future for our children. And we have to take it to do that. And that's going to require us, you mentioned it, Brian, it's going to require us to build resilience, and that will include through regulation, but we can do it.
Thank you. And last word to Thomas.
Thank you, Ryan. I think achieving digital and sustainable recovery requires us to create a comprehensive action plan, which pretty much touches on every aspect of our social, our regulatory, our practical, our educational system. And we really have to get that right. And we have 6 months.
We're right on time. So this has been Euractiv Building Back Better, and thank you for all your contributions. For those who watched on YouTube, for those who sent their questions, we're very grateful to you for that. Some great input there today. And to our panelists, Thomas, Alison, Veronica, and Stefan, thank you for your excellent contribution, and we really value your time this morning. If you want to continue to comment on this or to send some questions also to our team, then go to at Euractiv and on Twitter and use the hashtag EA Debates. We'll see you soon for the next of our publications as well. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll be publishing more on this in the coming days as well. So stay tuned for that.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks to everyone. It was very interesting.
Indeed.
Thank you. You hear me now, guys? Thanks so much. That was really good, and you're very well paced all the way through as well, which I really appreciate. That was a very even, smooth discussion. So super for that. Good questions today. So also clearly people were engaged with the topic.